The first thing I remember is the scrape of my father's boot against the barn floor, slow and hard, like he was grinding something down under his heel. It was still dark outside, not morning dark, where you can feel the sun coming somewhere behind the trees. It was the deep kind, the kind that makes the lantern flame look small. The cows were shifting in their stalls, chains clicking against wood, and I had my hands wrapped around the handle of a milk pail that was cold enough to bite my fingers. I was 16 years old, maybe close to 17, and my father had just finished telling me what a husband was supposed to be. He did not raise his voice. He hardly ever did. That was what made it worse. He said it like he was naming the parts of a harness. This strap goes here, that buckle holds there. A wife listens, a husband leads. A house stands straight when the man inside it does not bend. And I stood there with hay dust in my throat and my face burning in the dark, thinking, if this is what marriage makes of a man, then I do not know whether I want to become one. My name is Jonas. I am an old order Amish husband and father, and I speak from the life I know. I tell these stories because there are things people think they understand about Amish homes, and there are things that only make sense when you have stood inside one. If this story speaks to something you were taught as a son, or something you had to unlearn as a man, I hope you will stay with me. And I would be grateful if you would subscribe and tell me in the comments what you believe a father should teach his son about marriage. In our home, marriage was not spoken of the way the English world speaks of it. There was no joking about falling in love, no soft talk around the supper table, no stories about courtship told with smiling faces while the little children listened. Marriage was treated more like weather, or planting, or death. It was simply a thing that came in its season, and a man was expected to be ready when it came. My father had been married to my mother for 23 years by the time I was old enough to notice how they moved around each other. He was not a cruel man in the way some people use that word. He provided. He worked. He kept the farm in order. He paid what had to be paid. He never let us go hungry, even in the hard years when the corn stood thin and the rain came too late. But he carried the house like it was a yoke, and he believed a man was failing if anyone could see the weight of it on him. My mother knew his steps before he reached the door. She knew which chair would quiet him. She knew when to put coffee on and when to let the silence sit. She was not small in spirit. I know that now. But when I was a boy, all I saw was how carefully she measured herself around him. And that taught me something before any words did. It taught me that marriage was a place where a woman learned to be careful and a man learned to be hard. That teaching came in little pieces, like splinters you do not feel until later. When I was 13, my father took me with him to repair a fence line after a storm. It was early March, the kind of wet cold that gets into your sleeves and stays there. We were carrying posts across the backfield, and he began talking about men from our district who had married badly. That was the phrase he used, married badly. One man had a wife who spoke too freely. Another had a wife who spent money without asking. Another let his daughters run too loose, and my father said you could see the weakness in that house from the road. I remember asking him, not with challenge, only because I did not understand, how a person could see weakness from the road. He stopped walking and looked at me over the post on his shoulder. He said, "A woman follows the shape of the man who leads her." That was the line. That was the sentence I carried for years without knowing how heavy it was. At 13, I heard it as instruction. At 16, I heard it as warning. At 22, when I began thinking about marriage for myself, I heard it as a threat. Because if a woman followed the shape of the man who led her, then every fear in her face would be my fault. Every quiet room would be my doing. Every child who learned to flinch from a father's mood would be proof of what kind of man I was. My father thought he was teaching me strength, but shame was what settled in me. But I was ashamed of the kind of husband I thought I was supposed to become. I thought I had to know more than my wife. I thought I had to speak last. I thought I had to keep worry hidden so well that she would mistake silence for peace. I thought tenderness was something a woman brought into a house, and a man either allowed it or refused it. Nobody said those exact words to me. That is how you know a teaching has gone deep. It does not need to be spoken anymore. What if I married and became my father in all the ways that hurt my mother? What if I did not know how to be different? I know some people hearing this will expect me to say I rebelled then, that I stood up and told him he was wrong, that I broke away in one clean motion. That is not how it happened. Most sons do not break from their fathers in one moment. They carry them. They argue with them in silence. They repeat things they hate because repetition feels safer than emptiness. They try on the old shape because they have not yet learned how to stand without it. When I did marry, I was 24. My wife was an adult woman with her own mind and her own faith. And I need to say that plainly. She chose, as I chose, inside the customs and understandings of our people. But I brought old lessons into our first home like tools I thought a husband needed. I thought I had to have an answer for every question. I thought if she was worried, I had to correct the worry instead of hearing it. I thought if I was afraid, I had to become quieter. The first winter after we married was hard. We had moved into a small place with a roof that complained whenever the wind came from the west. The stove smoked when the draft was poor. Money was thin. I was doing carpentry work when I could get it and helping on farms when I could not. There were evenings when I came home with my shoulders aching so bad I could feel each nail I had driven that day. My wife would ask simple things. Had I eaten at noon? Did I speak to the man about the payment? Was I worried about the bill for the mare? And I would answer like every question was an accusation. Short, flat, final. Then the house would go quiet. The terrible thing was, part of me felt satisfied by that quiet. Not happy, not peaceful, satisfied. Like I had done what a man was supposed to do. I had ended the discussion. I had held the line. I had kept control. Then I would see her turn back to the stove or fold a towel more slowly than it needed folding, and the shame would rise in me again. Because I knew that quiet. I had grown up inside it. One night, after we had been married maybe 7 months, she set a cup down on the table in front of me. Not hard, just firm enough that I looked up. She said, "Jonas, I am not your burden to manage." That was the one line. She did not cry when she said it. She did not shout. She stood there in the lamplight with her hands at her waist and looked at me like she was giving me a chance to tell the truth. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say I was tired. I wanted to say my father had taught me this was how a husband kept a house from falling apart. I wanted to say I did not know another way, but the words would not come, because she was right. I had been treating marriage like something I had to hold down, when it was something I had been invited to hold together. There is a difference. It took me years to learn that difference in more than words. Do not let anyone tell you that a man unlearns his father quickly. He does not, especially if his father was not a monster. That makes it harder, not easier. If everything had been evil, I could have thrown it away. But my father had also taught me to rise before daylight. He taught me to keep my word. He taught me to bring hay in before the sky broke open. He taught me that children need a roof that does not leak, and a father who comes home when the workday is done. Those things were good. So I had to learn how to separate the good wood from the rotten beam. I had to learn that leadership in a home is not the same as control. Providing is not the same as deciding alone. Silence is not the same as strength. A wife is not proof of a man's authority. She is a person standing beside him before God, and if he cannot hear her, then he is not leading. He is only walking ahead and calling it faithfulness. The first time my own son was old enough to ask about marriage, I felt that old barn come back to me. He was 14. We were mending a gate latch in the mudroom because rain had kept us from working outside. His hands were still boyish, but he was beginning to get that length in his arms, that awkward stretch that comes before a son realizes he is almost as tall as his father. He asked me whether a husband always gets the final word. I could hear my father's answer before I gave mine. It was right there, waiting. For a moment I understood how easy it would be to pass down what had been passed to me. Not because I believed every part of it, but because old words sit ready in the mouth. They require no courage. I wiped the latch with a rag. I took longer than I needed to. Then I told him, a husband should be the first to listen, because he carries responsibility for what his listening builds. My son looked at me like he was not sure whether that answered the question. Maybe it did not, fully, but it was the truest answer I had. I have thought often about my father since then. He is older now. His hands are bent at the knuckles, and he walks more carefully across uneven ground. There are still things we do not speak about. I do not expect him to become another man at the end of his life. Some sons spend too long waiting for a father to confess what he may never have language for. But I have also seen him soften in ways he would not name as softness. I have seen him sit at my mother's table after supper and ask whether she wants the lamp moved closer. I have seen him pause before answering her. I have seen him hold a grandchild with more patience than he ever showed himself. People are not only the harm they pass down, but harm passed down is still harm, and a son must decide what ends with him. That is what I understand now. My father taught me many things about marriage. Some were useful, some were heavy. Some made me ashamed before I even had a wife because they made me believe a husband had to be less gentle in order to be more faithful. I do not believe that anymore. I believe a man can be steady without making his house afraid. I believe he can provide without using provision as a throne. I believe he can lead by telling the truth, including the truth that he does not always know what to do. I believe children learn about marriage not from what fathers say in barns, but from how fathers speak when supper is late, when money is short, when a wife is tired, when a son is watching from the doorway and pretending not to listen. That is where the teaching happens, not in the big speech, in the ordinary hour. If you are a father, your son is learning from you before you mean to teach him. He is learning what a man's voice does to a room. He is learning whether love sounds like patience or command. He is learning whether apology belongs in a husband's mouth. He is learning whether the woman beside you becomes smaller or stronger in your presence. And if you are a son carrying words that made you ashamed, I will say this plainly. You are not required to hand every word down. You can honor what was good without repeating what wounded. You can keep the work ethic and leave the hardness. You can keep the commitment and leave the pride. You can keep the faith and still learn tenderness. That is not rebellion against fatherhood. That may be the first honest work of becoming a father yourself. So when people ask me what Amish fathers teach sons about marriage, I do not have one answer. I have the answer I was given and the answer I am trying to live. I was taught that a wife follows the shape of the man who leads her. But now, after years of marriage, years of mistakes, and years of seeing my own children watch me closer than I wanted, I would say it differently. A family does not follow the shape of a man's control. It grows in the shelter of his character. And character is not measured by how hard a man can make himself. It is measured by what grows safely beside him. If this story stayed with you, I hope you will subscribe and come back for more stories from Amish life as I have known it. And I would like to ask you this. What is one thing about marriage that a father should teach his son before the world teaches him something worse?